Welcome to Face for the Newsfirst team. I'm Niresh Eliathambi. The migrant workers of our country perform an exceptional service to our nation, our economy, especially at a time when our economy is struggling to get back on its feet. And indeed, we had a record level of foreign exchange which was sent back to this country in 2025. All the more reason that we here in Sri Lanka need to keep tabs on what's going on with our migrant workers, and one of those who has done a lot of valuable research on this is Dr. Bilesha Weeraratne, who is a research fellow and head of migration and urbanization policy research at IPS, which of course is the Institute of Policy Studies. Dr. Bilesha has in fact just completed some research on sexual and gender-based violence among migrant female domestic workers, which is known as SGBV for short. Good evening and welcome to the show, Bilesha.
Good evening, Niresh. Happy to be here.
Right. Bilesha, tell us about your research. How did you conduct this research, which provides a lot of insights into the issues, the challenges that our female domestic migrant workers face?
So it originated as a request from the Sri Lanka Bureau of Foreign Employment, because they wanted to know the sexual and gender-based violence experienced by female domestic workers or migrant female domestic workers going abroad from Sri Lanka. So with that request, I crafted a study to understand how and why sexual and gender-based violence is experienced by female domestic workers and what can be done to prevent it or improve the conditions for female domestic workers abroad. So what we did was, we used a rare source of information, which is the complaints lodged by the migrant workers themselves, the female domestic workers themselves. There is a system at the Sri Lanka Bureau of Foreign Employment where migrants, any type of migrants, could complain if they experience any issue while working abroad. So this complaints management system has a good pool of or resource of complaints lodged by migrant workers. We picked female domestic workers, and specifically those originating from 3 countries, that's Saudi Arabia, Kuwait and UAE, and complaints related to sexual and gender-based violence, to find how and what is going on in that area. So we looked at 42 such complaints, and also we conducted about 8 key informant interviews with some Sri Lanka Bureau of Foreign Employment officials and migrants and their families to get a full understanding of it. So we adopted a thematic analysis approach. It's a purely a qualitative study because these are complaints, not numbers. So the qualitative nature of the complaints were extensively analyzed, adopting a world of work approach where we look at the complaints from a employment setting, because these workers are working but also living in the same household most often. So we adopted this world of work approach as well as a human rights approach, because people have a basic right for to have a safe and a dignified employment experience. And so these are the 2 approaches that we looked at this whole issue through.
Right, and I can see why you went for a qualitative approach rather than quantitative, because a lot of these migrant workers who get harassed are unlikely to report, I would expect, which is so in many societies. I mean, even in Sri Lanka, people who are harassed are not so likely to report it, so the numbers would actually be far greater than the 42 that you would have access to.
Could be, yes, there were more, but we purposely selected 42 for this study to keep it manageable, and we purposely selected some very interesting cases that we could get diverse view or an understanding of the issue. But Niresh, I also want to highlight that not all migrant workers or female domestic workers experience issues while they are working abroad. There are some migrant workers who have very positive experiences and they are very happy in their places of employment. But then there are employment conditions where there are female domestic workers who experience bad outcomes in terms of sexual and gender-based violence. When they do experience such situations of sexual and gender-based violence, it becomes very ugly, very horrible. So that is why we purposely selected to bring out the experiences of those who are undergoing or those who have undergone. So this is in no way saying that this can be generalized to all migrant workers or all female domestic workers, because not everybody would have such a bad experience. So we are bringing out those who undergo a bad experience. This is what happens to them.
Right. And when you say sexual and gender-based violence, could you give us a description, of what types of violence we're talking about? Because this varies. It's a wide range, isn't it?
Yes, Niresh. Now, there is a misconception that sexual and gender-based violence is only sexual related violence, or it is only experienced by women. No, the sexual and gender-based violence is any sort of physical, sexual or psychological harm that is inflicted on men, women, girls or boys based on their gender. Any sort of violence can become a sexual or gender-based violence if it is inflicted based on a gender. Now, if I give you an example, if we look at food deprivation, if a woman is deprived of food because she is a woman, let's say a female domestic worker is in the task of cooking and making the meals in a household that she is employed, but the cultural setting implies that women have to eat last, men have to eat first. This is the gender-based aspect of it. So because of this gendered nature of this situation, a woman experiencing food deprivation can become an aspect of sexual and gender-based violence. Because she's a woman, only she has to eat last in the family, and then sometimes employers use this as a tool to reprimand employees.
Tell me a little bit about the profile of a harasser, in the sense there's no one typical personality, is there? It's again a very broad continuum.
Yes, the harasser can be diverse. In our experience, when we looked at this empirical evidence, we saw that sometimes it was a male, but not always a male. Sometimes there were women also. So when it was a male, it could have been the employer in the female domestic worker setting in the household head would be the sponsor of this woman to the Middle Eastern country, or at times it was a relative of this household, a male coming in and visiting. And there were times where there were co-workers or male co-workers harassing these women. And then also there were women. Sometimes the female household head or the household member of the female household members were harassing. There were instances where they would have given unreasonable demands to lift heavy carpets or work extra long hours without reasonable times of break. So these were imposed by the women. So it is not always a male member that is inflicting this sexual and gender-based violence. And we saw that it was not only the employer's setting that was inflicting this sort of issues. We also saw that there were recruitment agents contributing to this sort of violence, where in the recruitment process, recruitment agents in Sri Lanka have been reasons why women had to experience these issues. And then in the countries of destination, there had been issues where the foreign recruitment agent was involved, and at times when the women were harassed in the households of employment and they complained and said they wanted to leave, the employer would take the woman to the foreign recruitment agency. And unfortunately there were many reports, many instances reported in our study that within the recruitment agency these women experience further sexual and gender-based violence. So it is not one type of people, it is not one gender, it could be inflicted by a whole diverse range of perpetrators.
Right. Now, we know that the migrant labor out of Sri Lanka is from all over our country, every district, every level of society, but this study was particularly among migrant female domestic workers, but again those are from all districts in the country, aren't they?
Yes, this migrant workers originate from all over the country, and this study also picked people from all over the country, but this is not a nationally representative study. I have to emphasize it again, because we purposely selected the migrant workers, but it is representative of the experiences that they undergo.
Right. And is there a typical profile of a victim, in the sense, are younger women more likely to be harassed than older ones? Is there any kind of profile like that, or is it something that all of them could experience?
It is something that all of them could experience. In this study, we didn't look at the characteristics of profiling because our sample was very small, only 42 cases that we looked at. But from what we saw, one common characteristic that we saw was that all of them had dire economic consequences or economic situations back in the country, and the job that they were having overseas was very important to keep their foreign remittances coming to their families, and the families having a consistent source of income. So because of that, they were very concerned about holding on to this job that they had overseas. So it affected the manner they would make a complaint, it affected the manner how they would take up a solution. So these were some of the characteristics that we saw, but we didn't look at the profile per se because it's a qualitative study.
Right. Now, from time to time, this issue is glanced at, and especially in recent years, it has come to the fore a lot more. But there are still so many gaps in the safety nets for such workers. What have you identified in that respect?
So one gap that we saw was the awareness. Now, when it comes to sexual and gender-based violence, it has a very specific way of reporting, especially if you take sexual abuse. It has to, for you to have a strong case and to prove an instance of sexual violence, you have to have made a police complaint, and then there has to be a medical report. Then only you can file a court case and prove that there was a violence happen. But the medical report has to be taken within a day. Now imagine the setting of a female domestic worker in the Middle East. You're in the household of your employer, and if you are abused, you have to go and tell a household member that you were abused and to take you to the police. So it is a very difficult situation. Imagine what side the employer would take, the household member's side or the worker's side. So there are some dynamics going on there. If they don't take her to the police in a timely manner, this entire report, entire possibility of proving the case will be difficult. So there are mechanisms in place for the female domestic workers to contact the embassy to get their support and reach out to the police and get this medical report in a hospital. But these things become practically difficult. So these are some of the gaps that we have seen in the report. Because they couldn't have these reports taken, it's hard for them to prove. And then another awareness gap is the women were not adequately aware of the timely nature of these reporting, and some have waited until they have come back to Sri Lanka to report. So then there is no way of reporting and getting any compensation for it. So the Sri Lanka Bureau of Foreign Employment finds it very difficult if they come back to Sri Lanka and then report after months of the incident taking place. Another gap that we saw was that many women are delaying reporting because of the possibility of repatriation. Why? Because in female domestic work there is a upfront incentive paid for these women to take up the job. So it's like $1,000 to $2,000. So this amount of money has been taken by the migrant worker's family and they have already used it. This in a way locks that migrant worker to that employer. And if you have to leave that place of employment, you will have to repay that amount. And now these people will not have that money to repay. So what they do is they will continue to work in the same place because they cannot finance that recruitment incentive. So the repatriation becomes a very glim option for them and they will not take it up because they cannot do that. So this is another gap that we have seen. And another major gap that we saw was that the support is a lot reactive in nature, meaning except for a few instances where there is some cultural sensitization done by the Sri Lanka Bureau of Foreign Employment at the time of the pre-departure training, most support happens after the female domestic worker makes a complaint. So it's reactive in nature. It starts kicking in after a complaint has been made. So that is a little too late when things could have been prevented. So that is another gap that we find. And most of the solutions that have been given to these women is either to go back to the same place of employment where the employee is warned about the situation and not to happen again, or they've been placed in a new place of employment in the same country. But there is no support for them in psychosocial support or counseling support to handle what they went through. They are survivors of sexual and gender-based violence. They need some emotional support, some psychosocial support, how to handle this and go back to the same place. It might be traumatizing to go back to the same place of employment. It might be difficult to start a new job in a new place of employment. So that support is not currently happening to female domestic workers who are survivors of sexual and gender-based violence.
Now, you mentioned that your research covered complaints from female domestic workers who were in 3 particular countries. Is there any are there any differences that you can see based on those countries, those cultures?
No, Niresh, I don't see many differences because all those countries are very similar culturally. The 3 countries that we picked were Saudi Arabia, Kuwait and UAE. So those are all the Middle Eastern countries having a similar cultural setup, a similar recruitment procedure for female domestic workers, and a similar setup for employment for female domestic workers. So we don't see much of a difference in that sense over there.
Right. So the challenges that the female domestic workers would face would be pretty much the same in all of them. Okay.
Yes.
Now, your report was quite extensive and very detailed. What else did you learn during your research?
Interestingly, one thing that we saw was the composition of the complaints made. So when we look at the complaints, there were about 7,500 complaints made in 2024. That is the latest data that we have. So out of them, only about 10% were harassment cases or sexual related cases. But then all of these can be related to sexual and gender-based violence, the broader definition of sexual and gender-based violence, because each issue is connected to the other. So let me take you through an example. Sometimes these women are expected to work for extensively long hours, especially during their prayer seasons or the festival seasons, where they have to stay and prepare meals in the night and work till about 2 a.m. and then go to rest and start again at 6 a.m. the next morning with about 4 hours of rest, which is insufficient for a person to work. So when you're deprived of a proper rest and you are required to work again, you cannot work productively. You might make mistakes. So not having proper rest because you're a female domestic worker is a gender-based violence. And then not being able to perform that job again properly will lead you for your employer getting frustrated with you, annoyed with you, and having verbal abuse. You are being scolded and reprimanded continuously to the extent of the worker getting distressed and becoming an unpleasant working environment. So it's a continuum and each issue leads to another. And then because these are female domestic workers, they are most likely to be residing in the same place of employment. So even after they are allotted 8 hours of work or 9 hours of work, they cannot say I'm not going to work anymore because they're already in there. And they cannot separate their living environment and their working environment. Moreover, they cannot not show up for work because they're already there, whether they're sick or not. Sometimes the employers have deprived them of getting access to medical treatment when there were work-related injuries also. Still, they had to work because they couldn't separate their work environment from their living environment. So these are some of the other findings that we saw.
Interesting and quite heart-rending as well. I am in conversation with Dr. Bilesha Weeraratne, Research Fellow at IPS. We need to take a short commercial break right now. Don't go away. We'll be right back.
අද මාතෘකාව ක්‍රීඩාවට අදාළයි.
ලෝක පූජිත ක්‍රීඩකයෙක් බව ක්‍රීඩා උපාධි ගන්න ක්‍රීඩා විශ්වවිද්‍යාලෙ ගිහිල්ලා නැහැ.
ලංකාවේ ක්‍රීඩකයාට ජාත්‍යන්තරයට යන්න තියෙන මාර්ගයේ නේද මේ ඇහිරෙන්නේ.
ක්‍රීඩා විශ්වවිද්‍යාලයක් හදනවා කියලා කියන්නම මේ රට කාලය නාස්තිරලා කිරීමක්. කව වගේ රටකට ක්‍රීඩා විශ්වවිද්‍යාලයක් ස්ථාපනය කරන්න ඕනි.
Sirasa debater with AAT Sri Lanka.
ඉරිදා සවස 6ට.
Yeah, this is the moment. The mic is calling. Season 3 is here. For the zest and the brand new alphas. Hip hop, voice teams back again. Season 3 lighting up the game. Gen Z flow, but the stars who claim all the brand new kids with the alpha flame. Young bloods running in the spotlight lane. Heartbeat pumping like a hurricane. Dream make a life changing frame. Step on the stage, rewrite your name.
Power rising, no holding back. Energy attack, rhythm on track. Of a iodine, now where the world gon' react when they bring their voice to the max.
Spotlight, open your moment begins. Show the world with the fire within. Voice team season 3, let the legend spin.
Generation Alpha, the new voice is here.
Scan the QR code. Enter your name, age, address, and phone number. Or simply WhatsApp us at 071 79977.
Welcome back to Face to Face. I am with Dr. Bilesha Weeraratne and we are talking about SGBV, the sexual and gender-based violence among migrant female domestic workers, and she has done some valuable research in this regard. Now, Dr. Weeraratne is a research fellow and the head of migration and urbanization policy research at the Institute of Policy Studies. And just to give our viewers a little bit of background on her, she previously was a postdoctoral research associate at Princeton University in New Jersey in the United States. Her research interests include internal and international migration, climate mobility, urbanization, the economics of education, labor economics and economic development, econometrics and economic modeling. She has collaborated and served as a consultant to prominent international organizations such as the International Organization for Migration, that's IOM, the International Labour Organization, ILO, the World Bank and the Asian Development Bank. Dr. Bilesha holds a BA in economics from the University of Colombo and an MA in economics from Rutgers University in the United States, and also an MPhil and a PhD in economics from the City University of New York. So indeed a distinguished researcher in many areas. Right. So Dr. Bilesha, your recommendations in your research, and that is most important because you've done all this research and you've come to these conclusions, and you have certain recommendations which are in, I believe, 4 pillars. Could you tell us a little bit about what these 4 pillars of recommendations are?
Yes, Niresh. So we grouped our recommendations under 4 pillars. One is about preemptive risk identification and awareness raising for female domestic workers. And the second pillar is about improving the efficiency and speed of reporting of complaints. The third pillar is about the support structure, specifically, as I hinted before, to integrate support structures for positive coping mechanisms. And the fourth pillar is about binding penalty measures to prevent further incidents of sexual and gender-based violence.
Right. So could you tell us a little bit more detail about the first pillar, preemptive risk identification? How that seems to be pointing towards a need for a broader program. How would you sort of structure that?
Yes, Niresh. So as I indicated before, most of our support starts reactively after the complaint is made. But I think a better approach would be to identify that somebody is vulnerable for sexual and gender-based violence and give support so that it doesn't take place, the issue doesn't happen. So that is why a preemptive risk identification is important, and awareness building is important among potential migrant workers so that they are aware of it before they go, how to handle it and how to spot it before things get escalated. So one strategy that we suggest is that now, before going for foreign employment, the recruitment agents will indicate certain working conditions. You have to work for 8 hours, take care of 3 kids, and it's a small family, it's a small house. But once you go there, you will see that it's a 3-story house, and there are 3 small children in this family, but in the upper floor there's another family, and things can be overwhelming and too much for one person to handle. But these things you will realize only after you set foot in that place of employment. So what we suggest is that have a mechanism to get in touch with the female domestic worker and ask about the actual working conditions in that place of employment, and have a scorecard to understand, is this a high risk setting for sexual and gender-based violence? If there is a lot of people and one worker, that means she's not going to get enough rest. And does she have a designated assigned place as her room to keep her private belongings, to take a rest and have some privacy? If this is not there, it is going to compromise her safety and privacy if she has to sleep in the kitchen or under. There was an instance where one female domestic worker had to sleep under a stairway. So then these are opening up opportunities for sexual and gender-based violence when you don't have a safe place to change clothes or have a rest. So you can find out these after a person gets into that place of employment. So what we suggest is there can be a mechanism for a post-arrival telephone call, maybe by the Sri Lankan embassy in the destination. The labour attaché can call and find out how are the working conditions and are they treating you in a reasonable expected manner. We can have a scorecard and a checklist and tick them off and ask some set designed questions. And similarly, we could have an online survey or something communicated via social media, maybe WhatsApp or Botim or something, so that the female domestic worker herself can fill in this information maybe within a month of arrival to understand. And then the Sri Lanka Bureau of Foreign Employment can evaluate these and understand whether the conditions are conducive for a safe working environment, or are they having any red flags for sexual and gender-based violence to take place. So then we can identify who's kind of at risk, can do further follow-ups, have inform the employer, you need to provide a place for this person to rest, you need to cut down the hours and give her a set break time of 8 hours a day or something, so that we can warn or get into some agreement with the employer before things get out of hand. So this preemptive risk identification mechanism is trying to aim to identify the risk structure and prevent violence or a sexual or gender-based issue happening. And then similarly, it's important to make the female domestic workers aware of it. They are made aware of all these things during the pre-departure training conducted by the Sri Lanka Bureau of Foreign Employment, but at that point and after they go overseas, there is a couple of months lag between, and there is a tendency that they will not remember or be able to remind themselves of all the instructions that they were given. So it will be good to have a booklet or a leaflet printed in the local languages, Sinhala and Tamil, so that they can go and have it with them and revise. And similarly, we can send some every 3 months some refresher information about the same content, so that there is a different way of communicating it to them and it becomes fresh, and they can remind themselves of what are they entitled to without waiting till things go down and become problematic. Similarly, if we can have some information package or a leaflet printed in Arabic language, they could go and present it to the employer in a very assertive manner, I would say, not to create problems at the beginning itself, but like this bureau can design a nice leaflet or a document that we can send in a positive way to the employer, saying that this is some of the things that we would expect you all to provide for our workers. So rather than finding somebody doing something wrong and reprimanding them, it will be better to provide them the information. This is what is the expectation, and this is how you should provide the worker with the facilities or the place of employment conditions. So that is what we mean by the preemptive risk identification and improving awareness of both the migrant worker and the employer.
So those are some very good key points, certainly, Bilesha, because these are, as you said, preemptive methodologies. So the sooner that these are implemented properly by all agencies combined, the less risk, I suppose, the mitigation of risk would be better. What about the second pillar, which is the efficiency and speed of reporting?
Yes, Niresh. Now, when there is a complaint made and the female domestic worker is overseas, now there are so many stakeholders involved in this investigation. The migrant worker is in the Middle East, the employer is in the Middle East, the foreign agent is in the Middle East, then the local agent is in Sri Lanka, the investigator from the Sri Lanka Bureau of Foreign Employment is in Sri Lanka, and the family is in a remote area in Sri Lanka. So there are so many stakeholders scattered around Sri Lanka and in different parts of the country of destination. So it becomes logistically little challenging to coordinate an investigation to bring everybody to the same forum in a meaningful manner. So that contributes to a little bit of a time lag. So we can further use information technology to have some virtual meetings and then also have recorded statements. Sometimes these issues that these women have undergone, it's very sensitive and it is harmful to get them to repeat it over and over to various stakeholders. So in such cases, maybe we can have recorded statements and have footage taken ahead of time, so that the evidence is already compiled and the investigation can be done in a speedy manner. Similarly, there are issues, language barriers happening, because the employer might need Arabic translation and the household will need a Sri Lankan translation, and we need a lot of translators, and so there has to be a coordination of so many stakeholders. So each node might add or contribute to a couple of days in the investigation process, and that means that the female domestic worker has to endure that setting for a longer period of time. So we have to identify where we can cut down. So if these translators can be sourced in a speedy manner, and each node is encouraged to cut down on their time from making it a complaint to an investigation, such time shortening can contribute to a lot of speeding up of the report, speeding up of the investigation. And another issue that we saw was that all these complaints have been initially made to the local recruitment agent. So as I indicated before, if the local recruitment agent took due action, it might not need to be escalated to the Sri Lanka Bureau of Foreign Employment, or there has to be a good mechanism where the Sri Lankan recruitment agent does whatever he can in this reconciliation or solving the matter, and after hitting certain point they escalate it seamlessly to the Sri Lanka Bureau of Foreign Employment, so that another complaint doesn't have to be made. Right now they have to complain to so many places, so if we can cut that down, that reduces the time and efficiency in handling these complaints. So these are some of the things that we bring out under that pillar.
Again, some excellent recommendations there. And what about your third pillar?
So the third pillar is about support structures for counseling or psychosocial improvement, because as I said, most support is about finding an alternative place of employment or repatriating them home. But sometimes these people are pressed for finances, they just want to continue working in the country of destination. So when they have been placed in another place of employment after surviving that sort of a issue, it's important that you provide them with the due psychosocial support to take up the new job and have a positive experience, at least in this round. So for that, what we suggested is we can have some virtual counseling sessions, online counseling sessions, free of charge, of course. If the migrant worker has to pay for it, they will not be able to afford it. So that can help them to come out with their inhibitions or their fears of starting a new place of employment, and the counselors can provide them with strategies to handle this new situation. Similarly, there can be support groups. Introduce these survivors to other survivors so that they can have a support group among themselves to encourage each other how to handle this new situation of going to a new place of employment or going back to the same place of employment. So that is the third pillar that we are looking at.
Right, and then the final pillar of your recommendations.
So final pillar is about binding penalties, or measures to prevent sexual and gender.
One, isn't
yes,
it?
Because right now, as I said, the perpetrators can be different. If it is the recruitment agents who are the perpetrators, what happens is that they are blacklisted or their license is revoked and they are not allowed to serve as a recruitment agent. But that is not restrictive enough in our understanding. We suggest that there has to be some financial penalty also, because they have incurred a lot of consequences on these female domestic workers, and just cancelling the license or blacklisting is not sufficient. If they have a financial penalty, that would restrict them from further committing such crimes, and that penalty can be used for some reconciliation or some support towards the victim or the survivor. Another source of penalty is that right now the blacklist is not all that public. So if we make that blacklist a little bit more public and people are aware of the recruitment agents through whom people went and experienced this sort of issues, people will not want to go to the same recruitment agents. Plus the recruitment agents will have a more motivation to ensure that the employers that they are matching their workers with will be better in providing a better migration experience. Similarly, for employers, now they are in the country of destination. Now it's going to be a little difficult for Sri Lanka to impose any penalties on them, but as a group of countries we can kind of come together with other sending countries and initiate some dialogue with the countries of destination to have a mechanism to kind of blacklist employers or improve the conditions for the workers in a way that there is a binding commitment from the employers overseas. So these are some of the things that we brought out.
Right, some excellent recommendations there. And we're almost out of time. One final question. Now, this has been some groundbreaking research on the part of yourself and your team from IPS. But do you feel that further research, perhaps continuous research, is required, considering the importance of migrant workers to Sri Lanka's economy?
Yes, Niresh, I think there are many research areas that can open up from this. One is about the question that you asked about profiling. You can take a larger sample in a quantitative manner and identify the characteristics, and that will give a more meaningful understanding about what characteristics contribute to be vulnerable to sexual and gender-based violence. So with that, we can have a good model to predict future vulnerability. And then also we can kind of understand how different countries would handle female domestic workers and the related sexual and gender-based violence, because the labor laws are not implemented very effectively in these countries of destination. So another study perhaps could look at how the labor laws can be tweaked or changed to ensure that the female domestic workers have a better experience while they are working overseas.
Excellent indeed, and I'm afraid we're out of time. My thanks to Dr. Bilesha Weeraratne, Research Fellow at the Institute of Policy Studies. Thank you very much for joining me this evening.
Thank you, Niresh. Thank you for having me here.
And thank you to you at home for watching. Don't go away because the news is coming up next. Have a great evening.